Okay, so the title of my talk is Compositionality in Natural Language and Large Language Models. Okay. Sorry. I'm not used to the, what is this? How do I get rid of that? All right, I'm gonna try that. Oh. Okay, and then to change slides? Oh, okay, all right. So the first question I think it's worth asking is, what are people trying to do with language? And it's clear that we do predict the next word. There's been some evidence of that here, and we've known that, in fact, for decades from saccades and from N400s and now from ECOG. But that's not our goal in using language. In fact, to the extent that we can predict what other people will say, it's less interesting. Oh, okay. I see. So just touch it, don't click on it. Okay. Okay, so we also want to be accurate. That's certainly true for citations. I think it's kind of funny that the first thing that people made clear that ChatGPT was not good at was getting citations right. But we also want to be accurate for math problems and for long-term learning. But there are many other situations where accuracy is not what we care about. So we might say there need to be more plugs in this room, but that's a matter of opinion. Is it true? Is it false? No one can really say. We might say everyone is here, which is false, but it might be potentially relevant. We could say Chris travels a lot, but that's a relative statement. It's neither true nor false in any absolute sense. And we also might say there's not enough security here. That would be sarcastic. But what we're usually trying to do, or I would say what we're always trying to do, is very simple. What people are trying to do when they use language is to understand the messages given the forms that they hear or see for the sake of comprehension. And we also need to choose the forms given our intended message for the sake of production. And then the final thing is that we want to conform to the conventions of our community or our communities. And that includes different contexts, different genres. Okay, so how do we do that? What is compositionality? So we might, the standard definitions look like this. So this is Barbara Partee, something like the meaning of an expression is the function of the meaning of its parts and the way they are syntactically combined. Or Dowdy said, meaning is determined by the meanings of the immediate constituents via semantic operation that corresponds directly to the relevant syntactic operation. So words and syntax should give us meaning. And that's a kind of building block view that I've represented there. Now, large language models, as we've heard over yesterday, don't use algebraic rules for language. And we can ask, is that a bug or is that a feature? So why do so many people assume that language is compositional in this way? Well, one reason is that we all understand each other. We agree on the meanings of new sentences, more or less. And that gives us the idea that there must be some kind of procedure for determining meaning. But then there are additional assumptions that kind of come out of nowhere, which are that sentences are generated by syntax and not by messages or some combination of form and meaning, and that the procedure must be determined by syntactic structures plus words, and that's stated explicitly in the Dowdy article. So I'm going to try to argue that these are both wrong and not needed. So let's take this very simple compositional rule. Philosophers talk about it often. So the adjective and a noun meaning is the intersection of the two. And so if you trained a model on these kinds of examples where a blue square was the combination of blue things and square things, then you'd expect the evaluation to treat something like this. So that red square meant something like this. Does red square mean that? Well, the first thing that comes to mind when people say red square is not that, it's in the Kremlin. It's the Kremlin. A red book is only red on the outside. A red pen, we all know, writes with red ink, usually. Red hair is not really red. Red grapefruit is even less red. Red states are not red. Red meat is not often red when you see it. And then we have many others, and these are among the most frequent collocations with red. Red socks, red cross, red flag, red line, red tape. None of them have that meaning of the color red. So that makes that, we're going to say the intersection really doesn't capture how we interpret meanings. Another possible idea is that we might use syntactic categories at least, or this is an assumption of the view. So adjectives and nouns, I've just given you a simple list. I think you'd all agree that these are or can be nouns and adjectives. And so at least maybe we have a syntactic rule that's very clear that the adjective comes before the noun, at least in English. But what about things like, I have pockets for all things digital, where that particular little construction, when you're talking about quantifying things, has the adjective after. So maybe, it's usually true, maybe that's just an exception, but then there's a whole group of exceptions, like it's very odd and it's rare for people to say an afraid child, an afraid cat or asleep, and a live duck, and a float log, and so on, and a blaze forest. And we all know that as native speakers of English, it's evident in judgments, it's evident in corpus data. So these are adjectives, but they don't occur before the noun, they resist that. And I'm just gonna give you an aside because this is sometimes the only thing people remember when I mention it. Why is that true? So it's not about the semantics, because near synonyms are fine as prenominally. And it's also not about the simple phonology, because an adult child is fine. It really has to do with the history of English and the fact that these particular cases used to be prepositional phrases. And that historical fact, so when they were prepositional phrases, nobody would use them before nouns. You wouldn't say the on drugs man. And that syntactic distribution just persisted throughout time, even though we all understand that afraid is an adjective. Okay, and of course, these models are great at this. This is not trouble for them. This is easy. So the rules of composition, I would want to, the idea I'm trying to get across is that they're constructions, which are pairings of form and function, and they are many and they are varied. So let's try another one. What about a simple predicate, subject predicate rule? Like at least when you have a subject and a predicate in a sentence, that the predicate applies to the subject. And that's certainly true if the book is read or Zach is a doctor, modulo, the interpretation of read in that context. But if I say Zach, a doctor, and that also needs intonation and context, then we have a very different meaning, right? Now we're expressing our attitude about this possibility. And when you look at other constructions, it becomes even more murky. So I'm going to briefly mention this, what I'd like to call the English gossip construction. So if I say, it's blank of you to be here, what's the word that comes to mind? Okay, I already gave it away. So if you're an American English speaker, you probably think nice. If you're British, maybe good. That is the most frequent adjective that occurs in this construction. It accounts for about 16% of the tokens. But we don't have to use things that are directly similar to nice. We can say something negative. So we can say it's crazy of her to talk about that. But notice it really is about gossip. We're judging someone's behavior. So you wouldn't say it's tall of you to reach the top shelf. But you could say it's big of you to reach the top shelf, but then you mean something, you don't mean big in size, you mean big like generous, because again, it has to be gossipy or evaluative. And so likewise, you wouldn't say it was good of the dishwasher to save water. But if you ask yourself, what is the predicate on what subject, it's certainly not applied to it. It's applied to the agent, which is buried in that prepositional clause, not typical syntax at all. But we don't have trouble with it. Okay, so the reversal curse was talked about yesterday, and I would like to say that I don't think it's a curse. So Jan LeCun had bemoaned on Twitter that large language models still haven't learned that if A is the same as B, then B is the same as A. But think about this. So if A is simplistic generalizations about language, and we say simplistic generalizations about language are the same as describing the weather in the Midwest, meaning it's true 1 second, it's not true the next second. Can you reverse them? Describing the weather in the Midwest is the same as simplistic generalizations about language? Like, no, right? It only makes sense in one direction. Okay, if X is more, so humans know, it is claimed that if X is more Y than Z, then in general, Z is less Y than X, irrespective of the specific meanings of X, Y, and Z. And it's the latter part that I think is not right. So I can say Pat is more clever than Wise, but I wouldn't say Wise is less clever than Pat. And even in a more naturalistic, or in the kind of case that is intended, like judgment is more important than experience, I might say that in one context, but still say experience is less important than, and still say that experience is more important than judgment. So it doesn't necessarily follow that the opposite is true, because everything depends on context. Okay, so back to not subject, predicate, but subject verb. So there is a generalization in English that the verb agrees with the plurality of the subject for pronoun, for certain cases, at least. It's not always true, it's often conflated. Generally true, but lower trunk wear in English. If you think about leggings, shorts, pants, tights, culottes, stockings, they all occur with the plural, even though they're really one item. And that's a general, small generalization, but you don't have to know what these things are called to know that you also want to use the plural with them. I don't know what they're called, can't help you. Okay, so other cases are aren't I, which, okay, that one is just an exception, but there are many other cases where it has to do with the semantics. So imagine a waitress saying the hash browns at table 9 is getting angry. Now hash browns is plural, but it's normal to use the singular is. These are found on the COCA corpus. The American public aren't stupid, fine, there are many of those. Or the American public is beset by a plethora of irrational delusions. Both true, but we don't care about truth. But anyway, my sister and best friend. Now, how am I gonna finish that? Well, it depends if they're one person or if they're two people. So it depends on the semantics, the interpretation. And then there are other cases where people often say things like, the most important thing at a wedding are the pictures. Someone said that to us. Okay, so what I would like to say is that natural languages are symbolic systems. They're the symbolic formalisms that best capture meaning, because we need to express all kinds of things, all kinds of subtle, context-dependent meanings, and language does pretty well. So one goal, I think, should be to understand natural languages in all their complexity. And so that means, in part, creating new tasks, new stimuli, and using human relevant tasks as much as possible. So I'll just say something about the human relevant tasks. Remember, okay, so superglue instructions to people. So the benchmark that was used for a long time, I know it's not used anymore, it's online, it's contaminated, but the instruction said, please use this training and provided answers to build an understanding of what the answers to these questions should look like. And I think that's really interesting because well, I'll give you an example. So in this kind of situation, the little boy is happy now, the little boy is not happy now. Is that an entailment, a contradiction, or neutral? Well, the participants were kind of trained to say it was a contradiction. But would people assume it's a contradiction? Right? I mean, when you hear sentences, you try to make sense of them. Or another example is Sam was fired by OpenAI on Friday. Sam worked at OpenAI the following Monday. That happens to be true. So what I'm getting at is that language gives us the clues to interpretation, but the meaning that we get involves that conventional, massive, complex system of constructions, but also context and world knowledge. And the other thing it needs, and this is relevant to the last two examples, is that communication, as linguists and philosophers have known forever, or at least since 1975, presupposes that others are being helpful. We wouldn't use language if we couldn't assume that others were being relevant, mostly truthful, sometimes polite. This may distinguish us from other animals, this goal to share and to be helpful. And so I would say when people say two sentences, we all do our damnedest to try to make sense of them. We don't say, oh, that's a contradiction, very rarely. And so I think it's very interesting. It's really intriguing to me that ChatGPT became so much more user-friendly, became such a different thing, really hit the world took the world by storm when it added the instruct GPT, when it aligned with human judgments of what kind of responses are helpful. So I think that's another goal, to better understand alignment and the retrieval, now I'm blanking, human feedback based on, help me out. Yes, reinforcement, right, of course, reinforcement. So, okay, I'm gonna briefly tell you if I have time, let's see. Okay, yes, do I? I think I do, okay. So, there are long distance dependency constructions. So some of you are going to go to sleep, but the linguists in the audience may pay attention, and some of you have even worked on these cases. If I say a simple base sentence like Tom believed we had enough of that. Sorry, I can't read it because there's something on here. But anyway, if I ask a question about the last word, I would say, what did Tom believe we had enough of? Okay, so it's as if the WH moved. Nobody thinks that it really moves in real time anymore. That sentence is fine, but if we say Tom grumbled that we had enough of the pie, then that sentence is judged by most people as somewhat odd on a gradient scale. What did Tom grumble that we had enough? Okay, so these are called the constructions that resist that kind of long distance dependency, like a WH word with some gap downstream, have been called island constructions, as if the elements can't get off the island. And so they resist being combined with long distance dependency constructions. Okay, so we've proposed a hypothesis and tested it, and now there's more data coming out that support this idea too. The hypothesis is that island effects arise from a clash of discourse functions, that once you understand the functions of the constructions involved, the fact that some combinations are more acceptable than others falls out. So the long distance dependency construction, why are you moving something to the front or in a prominent position? Because you want to focus your attention on it. It's either more topical or more focused. And the island construction is a construction that tends to background the information to varying degrees. So I won't go through all this data, but we used 8 or 9 different constructions that vary in their degree of acceptability. We made up examples. We used 144 examples, tested them on 600 and some people. We used a semantic task to get at acceptability, to get at this idea of backgroundedness. And it was just a presupposition task. So we negated the sentence. So we said, please think about what the following sentence means. Bill didn't claim that Skylar recited a poem. And then we asked, did Skylar recite the poem? And of course, you're not sure, but you can make an educated guess based on that sentence. And we did that for each of the sentences. Nobody had to do too many. We had fillers that tested that people were staying awake and so on. So we also tested 2 separate groups on the questions, just judgments, not a very natural task, but that's what we used, and also on the base sentences. Okay, and the stimuli was constructed, hopefully, I believe, after, so that wouldn't be online. Anyway, our main experiment was on humans, and we did this many ways, and there's a lot of data. It's in a cognition paper. But let me just point out what we expect. The more negation, the more negated is less backgrounded. What's asserted is negated by main clause negation. What's presupposed is more backgrounded. And then acceptability ratings are on the top. What we predict is a significant interaction where the base sentences, the simple sentences without long distance dependencies, shouldn't be affected by negation, but the WH question should be. Okay, that's what we predict. Let's see what we see. For humans, we get that really nice correlation, and it works for 7 out of 8 of the constructions. And just recently, last week, an undergrad, Nora Graves, tested it on GPT-4 with same tasks, and it correlates. The base sentences are a little less variable, but the judgments, and notice they're not giving the judgment of 3 like I don't know. They're giving the gradient judgment, so there are a lot of 2s here. So they know when it's possibly not acceptable. Anyway, so where should we go next? Okay, I'll just summarize. It's important to create new tasks, new stimuli. We need new ways of probing LLMs. I think it's really exciting to hear what people are doing. I love Misra and Kyle's work. Also what we heard about from Bao, Ben, and others. So We also, I think, need to better understand the role of helpfulness in the instruction tuning. I think it's really important, but we want to know exactly how, when. And so I agree that large language models should lead us away from algebraic rules and syntax, the way John was saying yesterday. And I think they should also lead us away from algebraic rules about meaning. So what we need to do is understand natural languages in all their complexity and understand how people learn and represent language. And another thing, I don't know if it's our job, but we really know almost nothing about how people reason. So when we say, well, people do this, we know nothing. So hopefully that will get worked out too. Okay, so I want to thank you. It was nice of you to listen, and thank you.